Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Saturday, January 24, 2026. And honestly, if you're feeling a little dizzy right now, you are definitely not alone.
Oh, vertigo's the right word for it.
I've been staring at the news feeds for the last 3 weeks, and I think we all just need to take a collective breath. It feels like the ground is shifting under our feet every single morning.
Absolutely. It really does.
Seriously, we walked into the new year thinking, okay, second term, we know the drill, we know the rhythm, but what we've witnessed from January 1st to today, it's not just a new chapter.
Yeah.
It feels like someone took the rule book of global trade, ran it through a shredder, and then, set the shredder on fire.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's historic.
Yeah.
And I don't use that word lightly. We're looking at a stack of documents here. Specifically, a massive report titled Trump's Economic Policies and Global Trade Impact that just dropped.
And we've got the breaking news on India and the chip wars on top of that. So that's our mission today. We aren't just going to list what happened. We need to figure out why the U.S. government is suddenly using tariffs to try and buy islands.
Right. Of all things.
We need to understand why a strategic ally like India is effectively facing a 75% tax on their goods. And the biggest mystery of all, with all this chaos, why hasn't the U.S. economy imploded?
It's the paradox of the year.
Yeah.
But to get there, we have to start with the paperwork.
Yeah.
Because the chaos, it actually has a structure.
Let's start with the memo, Inauguration Day, January 20th. While everyone was watching the parade, this document went out establishing the America First trade policy. I read through it, and it felt like they were literally redefining the dictionary.
They essentially were. This memo lays out 3 pillars that govern everything we're seeing now, and the first one is the most radical departure from standard economics. Pillar 1, deficits equal unfairness.
Which just drives economists crazy. Usually you'd say a trade deficit is about savings rates or currency strength, like it's just math. But this policy treats it like a crime scene.
Exactly. The memo states that if the U.S. buys more from country A than country A buys from the U.S., that gap is prima facie evidence of cheating. It doesn't matter why the gap exists. The gap itself is the offense.
So the scoreboard is the only thing that matters, and that leads directly to what they call reciprocal tariffs.
Right.
We saw the precursor to this back in April 2025, Liberation Day, as they called it.
That was the baseline. A 10% tariff on everyone climbing up to 50% for countries with big deficits. Yeah. But Pillar 2 is where the geopolitical strategy really comes in. It redefines China.
This was the commercial rival designation.
Yes, and the nuance here is crucial. The goal isn't to decouple or, cut ties with China completely. The memo explicitly says the goal is to use the trade relationship as leverage.
Oh, so you keep the connection so you have something to squeeze when you need a favor.
Exactly. It's not go away. It's stay here so I can negotiate.
That's a very specific kind of relationship. And then Pillar 3.
Pillar 3 is the simplest. Security equals production. The argument is that you cannot be safe if you don't make your own stuff. Not just missiles, but everything. If it's not made in America, it's a vulnerability.
Okay, so that's the philosophy. Deficits are bad, trade is leverage, and production is security. If we were talking a month ago, I'd say, okay, that's aggressive protectionism.
Sure.
But this last week, we moved from protectionism into something that feels like a geopolitical thriller. We have to talk about Greenland.
The Greenland incident. This is where the rubber really met the road.
And the road was made of ice, right?
And the road was made of ice. So just to set the scene, on January 17th, the administration announces a 10% tariff on 8 European nations, Denmark, Germany, the UK.
Basically our closest NATO allies. And the threat was that this would jump to 25% by February 1st.
A massive economic hit.
But the condition for lifting the tariff wasn't open your markets or lower your subsidies. The condition was sell us Greenland.
I mean, we have never seen tariffs used as a tool for territorial acquisition in the modern era. It's reminiscent of 19th century diplomacy.
And what was the justification?
The White House cited national security, specifically the Golden Dome Missile Defense Project. They argued that if China or Russia got a foothold in the Arctic, it was an existential threat.
So they basically walked up to Denmark and said, nice economy you have there. Shame if something happened to it. Now about that island.
That is essentially the dynamic. And naturally, the EU exploded. There were emergency meetings, talk of triggering their anti-coercion instrument.
Which is their legal framework for fighting back against economic bullying.
Exactly.
But, and this is the wild part, it worked. Sort of.
It forced a result. NATO Secretary General Rutte had to fly in and broker a deal on January 21st. The U.S. withdrew the tariff threat And in exchange, they got a framework deal.
We don't know the details on that.
The details are classified, but it likely gives the U.S. massive security concessions and basing rights in Greenland.
So they didn't buy the island, but they got the keys to the driveway.
Precisely. And the lesson the administration took from this is, this works. Which brings us to Campaign 2 and the Iran sanctions.
This dropped on January 13th, a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran.
This is a complete rewrite of how sanctions work. Traditionally, you go to the UN, you build a coalition.
You get everyone to agree.
Right. This approach is unilateral. The U.S. is saying, we don't need a coalition, we have the American consumer. If you want to sell to Americans, you stop trading with Iran, period.
It's efficient, I'll give them that. But the collateral damage is massive. This isn't just hitting rogue states. This is aimed squarely at major economies like China and, painfully, India.
India is really the eye of the storm right now.
Yeah.
If you want to understand the sort of human cost of this policy, you look at India.
It's so confusing, though. India is a strategic ally. They're in the Quad. We do military exercises with them. Yet, when I look at the numbers, they're taking a harder beating than almost anyone else.
They are. It's what I call the tariff stack. You have to visualize it like layers of a cake or maybe levels in a very difficult video game.
Okay, walk us through the levels.
Level 1 was April 2025, the reciprocal tariff. India runs a trade surplus with the U.S., so boom, 25% tariff on everything.
Okay, so that's the baseline entry fee.
Then comes level 2 in August 2025, the Russia oil penalty. The U.S. accused India of buying cheap Russian crude, refining it, and selling it to the world.
They said this was funding the war in Ukraine.
Exactly. So they slapped another 25% on top of the first one.
So wait, if I'm a textile manufacturer in Mumbai trying to sell shirts to New York, I'm effectively facing a 50% tax.
Correct. And now, with the Iran announcement, there's the threat of level 3, another 25% if they don't cut ties with Tehran. So you are looking at a potential 75% tariff wall.
That's not a tariff. That's an embargo by another name. Yeah. Business can't survive a 75% markup.
It can't, and the data shows it. Between May and September of 2025, Indian exports to the U.S. collapsed by 37.5%. And we aren't just talking about numbers on a screen. This is the diamond polishing industry in Surat, the leather industry, textiles. These sectors employ millions of people, and the order books are they're drying up.
But this is where the story twists again, because just yesterday, January 23rd, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, made a comment that felt like a signal flare.
Bessent is a fascinating figure. He's often seen as the market whisperer or the good cop in this administration.
And what did he say?
He said, quote, "Our 25% tariff on India has been a huge success. I would imagine there is a path to take them off now."
A path to take them off? That implies the punishment isn't permanent.
It implies that the pain is the point, but only until you submit. Bessent claims Indian purchases of Russian oil have collapsed. Now, the Indian government disputes this.
Of course they do.
They say we didn't change our policy. But private Indian refiners, they likely got terrified of the sanctions and just stopped buying.
So the U.S. creates a crisis, waits for the behavior to change, and then offers to solve the crisis it created.
Exactly. It confirms that these tariffs are just knobs on a control panel. They turn the heat up to boil the water, and once the tea is made, they might turn it down.
High-stakes negotiation tactic, where the chips are entire national economies.
Speaking of chips, let's pivot to the other war, the tech war.
The Pax-Silica. Yeah. It sounds like a sci-fi empire, or a very exclusive peace treaty.
A bit of both. Signed in December 2025, the Pax-Silica is essentially a club for trusted partners in AI and semiconductors.
Yeah.
The rules are binary. You're either inside the club
or you are outside and facing the wall.
That's it. And we saw the enforcement mechanism kick in on January 13th with the new chip tariffs.
Right. A 25% tariff under Section 232 on specific advanced chips, the NVIDIA H200 and the AMD MI325X.
Yes.
Hold on. Let's pause on Section 232. For those who don't speak trade lawyer, this is a Cold War era law, right? It was meant to ensure we had enough steel to build tanks.
Precisely. It was designed for basic national defense materials. Using Section 232 to tax consumer graphics chips and AI processors it's a massive legal stretch. It frames AI development as a direct matter of national survival.
But there's a loophole in the tariff, isn't there?
The biggest loophole possible. The tariff is exempt if the chips are manufactured in the U.S.
So it's just a blunt instrument to force reshoring. It's saying if you want to build the brain of the future, you have to build the skull in Arizona.
That's a great way to put it.
Ooh.
And it's backed by a new strategy we saw emerge on January 14th regarding critical minerals. The administration issued a directive that pushes commercial diplomacy first.
Which means?
It means they're learning. Instead of just slapping a tariff on lithium or cobalt immediately, which would hurt American companies, they said, we will give you 180 days to negotiate a deal. If we can't agree, then the tariffs hit.
It's negotiation with a gun on the table.
It is. But it's a slight evolution from the shoot-first approach of 2025. It acknowledges you can't just blockade the materials you need for your own economy.
Okay, so we've got 50% tariffs on allies, we're threatening Europe for land, rewriting tech trade rules. Logically, if you took an Econ 101 class, you'd assume the U.S. economy would be in ruins.
You would think so. High tariffs usually mean high inflation, a crash in consumption.
But the numbers, they aren't showing that. GDP is up 4.3%, inflation is moderate at 2.7%, the stock market was hitting highs in June. Is this real, or are we looking at a mirage?
It's what I call the sugar high economy. It's real, but it's chemically induced.
How are they pulling it off?
It's a three-part trick. First, the American consumer is incredibly resilient. They kept spending down their savings. Second, the administration pumped the economy with corporate tax cuts.
Okay.
And third, and this is the key, they're using the tariff revenue to fund it. The U.S. government collected $236.2 billion in tariffs.
So they are taxing imports, taking that cash, and then feeding it back to corporations to keep stock prices up.
Essentially, yes, it's a wealth transfer. But it masks the pain. The cost of goods is higher, but the tax cuts and the stock market gains make people feel wealthier, so they keep buying. It works until it doesn't.
And while the U.S. is enjoying this sugar high, what about the rest of the world?
They are dealing with the hangover. The global system is fracturing. We are seeing a massive rush toward nearshoring, moving factories to Mexico or Canada to try and slip under the U.S. tariff umbrella.
But not everyone can move to Mexico.
No. And this is the tragedy of the policy. The losers are the developing nations. Countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, they run trade surpluses because they make cheap clothes and shoes.
And under this deficit equals unfair rule,
They get hit with reciprocal tariffs. But they don't have the geopolitical leverage of India or the EU. They just get crushed.
And usually there would be a referee. You'd go to the World Trade Organization and say, hey, this is illegal.
The referee has left the building. The U.S. is currently violating the core principle of the WTO most favored nation status, which says you have to treat trading partners equally.
We're charging different rates to everyone based on political whims.
The rules-based system that governed the world since 1947 is, for all intents and purposes, dead.
That is a terrifying thought. But there is one thing that could stop this whole machine in its tracks. We have to talk about the Supreme Court.
Yes. The sword of Damocles. The case is Learning Resources v. Trump.
And I love that the plaintiff is Learning Resources. They make, what, plastic educational toys?
Exactly. Plastic fruit, play money, teaching tools, modest company. But they're challenging the legal foundation of this entire economic war.
They're challenging IEEPA.
The International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This is the law the president is using to impose all these tariffs. Now, IEEPA was written to deal with unusual and extraordinary threats to national security.
Usually terrorists, drug cartels, or rogue nuclear states.
Right, and the administration is arguing that. Buying too many plastic toys from China is an unusual and extraordinary threat.
That's their argument.
That is their argument. They declared the trade deficit itself a national emergency. Learning Resources is arguing that this is an abuse of power, that Congress never intended for the president to use emergency war powers just to fix a balance sheet.
So if the Supreme Court agrees with the toy company, what happens?
The legal floor drops out. The reciprocal tariffs, the India stack, the China leverage, it all relies on IEEPA. If the court rules that trade deficits are not a national emergency, the tariffs could vanish overnight.
And the billions of dollars in revenue that are propping up the tax cuts.
Gone. The chaos that would ensue if the tariffs were suddenly repealed might be just as disruptive as when they were imposed.
So we're watching the court just as closely as the White House. But let's zoom out for a final thought. We've described a world where trade isn't about efficiency anymore. It's a weapon.
It's a power-based system. We have moved from rule of law to rule of strength. Whether it's buying Greenland, squeezing India, or building a chip fortress, the tool is always the same: access to the American consumer.
It's leverage. The administration calls it America First. But here's the question I want our listeners to really sit with.
Go for it.
Leverage works. We see it working. Root came to the table. India might buckle on oil. But leverage is a relationship based on force. If you keep squeezing your friends, if you keep treating allies like ATMs or hostages, At what point do they stop trying to get into the club?
That is the ultimate risk. We see India pivoting toward Russia and China despite the pressure. We see the EU building their defenses. We see the BRICS alliance expanding.
Right. So is this leverage forcing the world to fall in line with American leadership? Or is it forcing the world to build a completely new economic system, a separate internet, separate banking, separate supply chains that simply excludes the United States entirely?
If the toll to enter the U.S. market becomes too high, eventually the world might just pave a new road around us.
And if that happens, we won't be able to buy our way out of it. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. We'll be watching the Supreme Court, and we'll see you next time.
Stay curious, everyone.